Whilst they're essentially the same in principle, climbing indoors and outdoors are actually very different. Whilst there's obviously many similarities, you're climbing within both, there are a lot of differences. For instance, the holds are less red and blue. But making that step into the outdoor environment can be very challenging, with lots of unknowns if you've never been before. And it's important to be prepared so that first off, you're safe, second, that you maximize your time, and perhaps most important of all, that you have fun. So Ethan, one of the major differences is the landings, isn't it?
It's still really important to be really mindful of your landing when you're indoors, and you want to make sure you're climbing down and not jumping off from the top, and obviously being aware of what's around you. Like, it is fully padded indoors. You've got the mats all around you. There's no seams or gaps.
And it's thick, high quality, gym mattresses as well.
And you've not got several boulders stacked up behind your back, or like a tree there, or
It's a landscape manicure landing.
Yes.
So when you're climbing outside, there's a few things to consider, isn't there, Ethan?
Yeah, so you want to make sure that the terrain around you is as flat as you possibly can make it. You want to make sure if there's any rocks like we've got here today, that if you have the pads available, that you've covered them, and you're very much aware of your surroundings. So tree stumps, boulders, things like that. You want to make sure that you're very much aware of that before you start climbing.
So in the current case, we're going to climb this problem here. Obviously one pad directly beneath it, another pad over the rock there. And as a top tip, I'd probably keep Ethan where he is so that he can spot and ensure that the person doesn't fall backwards and land on that rock just behind him. The thing about climbing outdoors is that every landing is different. So take each case as it comes and adapt to your environment. So indoors, it's obvious where the climbs go because you've got the colours leading the way, but it's not always obvious how you go about climbing them.
Yeah, so I think obviously indoors, there's probably a set way of doing a problem. Indoors, you've usually got like a starting position, you've got a tag on the wall telling you where your hands need to start and your feet need to start. Again, you haven't got that outside.
Climbing problems outdoors is a lot less obvious than it is indoors. In this case, Ethan, well, everything's brown.
Yeah, so it's obviously really important to be humble first and foremost when you go outdoor bouldering. You've not got big orange and pink blobs littered all over the wall. You're going to have to be a little bit more creative in how you get up.
So looking at this problem here, we've got loads of holds to play about with, and there's loads of different ways to climb it as a result of this, depending on your height or your strength or your flexibility. So what may be the starting holds for one person or position may be different for another.
Yeah, so it's important to build your confidence when you first go outside, try lots of different styles of boulders, and just get used to moving on real rock.
Conditions, another aspect to climbing indoors that differ greatly from climbing outdoors. We're at the climbing hangar in Sheffield. It's an air-conditioned climbing wall. You get good conditions year-round. It's nice, it's dry, it's a good temperature for climbing, and there's a roof over our heads, so it's not raining. Conditions are one of the most important aspects of climbing outdoors. Most important of all, Ethan, is?
I mean, it's not climbing on wet rock. I mean, it's going to give you a rubbish session, but most of all, it's going to be bad for the rock and increase erosion.
And from a performance perspective, people tend to prefer the cooler months of the years, don't they? Because that's when you're going to sweat less and the rock is at its grippiest. But if you're just looking for a more recreational session, you're just looking at going and doing some climbing. It's fine climbing in higher temperatures or higher humidity. It's just that it might feel a little bit trickier, and you can bring your grade down accordingly. So brush and holds is really important both indoors and outdoors, but I feel it's often overlooked indoors.
If you brush a hold, it's going to feel better to climb on, it's going to be grippy, it's going to leave it in a nicer state for the next person.
So this is another good example, and this hold is not only chalky, but if you can see from the top, it's got a lot of boot rubber on as well, which is going to reduce the levels of friction. So giving that a brush, and there's a lot of chalk behind it, will mean that bit's grippier, not just for your hands, but for your feet as well. Outdoors, cleaning the rock is really important. Much like indoors, part of the reason for this is through performance. If a hold is caked in chalk, then it's not going to be as grippy as it is if it were to be clean. And another reason is simply because it's unsightly.
Yeah, so there's nothing worse than rocking up to a boulder problem than it being caked in chalk and tick marks, all over the place. So yeah, important to leave it as best as you can in the state that you found it, and hopefully better than you found it maybe, so it's in good condition and good nick for the next person who's going to be there. Brushes
come in all different shapes and sizes, from this fairly worn one here through to this beefy new one here. And if you haven't got one or don't want to spend the money on one, an old toothbrush will also do. The key is that they have soft bristles so that they don't damage the rock further. When you're brushing, you don't have to be that firm with it. Just give it a gentle once over and you'll notice that all of that chalky residue has gone. You're never going to get rid of it all, and ultimately the weather will do the rest when it next rains. Spotting indoors is usually relatively straightforward and only involves one person.
Yeah, I mean, you only really need to think about how that person's going to fall and making sure they don't fall awkwardly.
Spotting outdoors requires a lot more thought than indoors, not least because there's a greater level of hazards about. Just looking at this problem here, you've got things like a rock behind you and a rock to one side. We've managed to protect this one here with a pad, so it's worth stationing spotters either in front or just beside in order to protect people's heads or their backs if they ping off backwards. Don't forget that spotting is an active process. You want your arms up in the air, ready to not catch someone, but direct their fall onto the pad and safety. Let us know in the comments below what differences you've found in between climbing indoors and outdoors.